Hello everyone, Sientir here with another Rambler for you, and today I want to talk about a topic that I would refer to as sort of the illusion of society. And what I mean by this is society sort of as it functions and works. I guess I should actually kind of step back and sort of define what I mean by society first. So when I use the word society, I'm generally referring to some sort of nebulous culture group. That's kind of at play, but basically a group of people working the unspoken sort of, sometimes spoken, rules of how a group of people interact and work together. So it's a combination of cultural influences, law, trends, or it's mostly culture put into practice, I suppose, in many regards. This is me thinking through, how do I define society on the fly? So this kind of has things, again, like spoken and unspoken rules, things like etiquette, for example, what's polite, what's not. Good example of sort of the arbitrariness of this is something that I've talked with my sister about some, which is in some parts of the United States, it's rude for wait staff to sort of engage you in conversation because it's wasting your time, whereas in other parts it's rude for them not to because it's being impersonal. So when I'm looking kind of at society as a whole, the thing then that I want to talk about, this illusion of society, is that society is not a concrete thing. It's an immaterial thing. It's kind of a collective idea that we all hold. It's almost imaginary in a way, but it's a very real sort of thing at the same time. And the thing that I find interesting about this is we become constricted by it when at the same time collectively we hold all power over it. So if we all decided to agree to some sort of change in how society functioned, we could do so, but we all have to agree, and that's where the problem occurs. And so the fewer people you have, the easier it is to get that sort of consensus that, no, we're all going to do things differently now. And I think this is a lot of what culture wars are built around, is a group of people saying, well, we think society should function differently, and another group than how this other group thinks it should function, and vice versa, and then trying to basically, people are trying to win converts to their side. Only that's not really how people engage in it. They want to try to control it through other means. Legal is the most common one, just because it has some veneer of enforceability. But the thing is, society in general has ways of sort of enforcing its rules, as it were, but it doesn't. It's just a thing, right? It's an idea that people have that we not entirely collectively agree on, but mostly. And a really good example, actually, of sort of the illusion of it is currency money in general. Why does money have value? Because we all collectively agree it has value. If people didn't think money had value and just woke up one day and be like, I don't think $1 is actually worth anything, then everybody did that, it wouldn't be worth anything. But because we all sort of collectively agree that it's worth something, then it is. This actually is really interesting. It kind of ties into the Assassin's Creed from those games, which is, if I'm remembering it correctly, nothing is true, everything is permitted. And as Ezio sort of explains, what it's talking about is we tend to think of society's rules as very hard and very concrete, but they're not. They're sort of a collective illusion, and it's very possible to not obey them. For example, road markings are not walls. You can drive over a road marking if you want to. It's usually a good idea to follow them, though, or which side of the road to drive on. It tends to be something really good for a society to agree on, but different societies have made different choices. Some say you drive on the left, others say drive on the right. And there's no particular reason why one should be better than the other. It's just a convention. And then once you have that convention, it's to everyone's advantage for everyone to follow it, because otherwise you have a lot of accidents. But this sort of effect, though, the sort of illusion of society, it's very powerful because again, people don't think of it as illusory, and that makes changing things surprisingly difficult when they could be fairly simple. You do sometimes get mass changes, but what I'm getting at here is the way sort of to change culture or society is to convince people that it should be different and that it can be. That we can agree for society to be different. That we can agree we don't like the way society looks right now. We can agree on all sorts of different things, but we need the buy-in from enough people for it to matter. And once enough people agree, and this can happen within subgroups, by the way, like this can be a cultural thing, by which I mean, I think of society as kind of a broader group, whereas like a culture or a subculture is kind of a group of ideas society is kind of putting into practice. So the way that a culture kind of controls things is often through ostracization. Say, well, if you're not going to play by our rules, you're not allowed in our club. Or other things kind of to try to push people out or whatnot. The extreme examples of these is things that get put into actual law and then people are ostracized into something called prison. But prison's not necessary for this ostracization to occur. You can have other things like shunning or things like that. People being driven out of communities through lots of subtle little ways. This is why there's anti-discrimination laws, because people can be forced out of communities without any real recourse if discrimination is allowed, because they can't make use of anything. If they can't make use of anything, they can't buy food, they can't get a job. All of these sorts of factors will push somebody out of community or to even something worse like suicide, because they feel like they don't have anywhere, they don't belong anywhere. And the belonging is such an important thing to us humans. So my biggest frustration with this sort of illusion, by the way, is how much people can rigidly try to reinforce it when it's causing harm and damage to people. The way that it creates excuses for people to not put in the effort to love each other, to learn about each other, how it can build up prejudices. A good example from my own life is actually with regards to sleep schedules. I tend to have a very wonky sleep schedule. It's part of why I like doing these ramblers, because they don't have to be coordinated with anybody per se. And that lack of coordination is really good for me, because my sleep schedule tends to kind of cycle around the clock. I don't know exactly why. I've sometimes speculated that I have a Baryaran day for how long I want to be awake. For those who don't get the reference, it's to the Froskin Saga, a sci-fi series I highly recommend, and a planet that has a 26.4 hour day. And as you might notice, that doesn't align to 24. What happens is society really is not built like the way that times of opening, expectations, all those sorts of things aren't built for people who are awake at night. It's just not. And people expect you to generally be awake during the day, and it becomes very difficult. This is actually a huge complaint I have with churches, is why is the tradition of Sunday morning service so ingrained into Christian culture that we rarely get services at other times of day, like evening, Saturday evening even, which is something that I'd prefer. But these conventions can be really powerful, and there's no reason for them to be, if that makes sense, like to exist. And breaking these conventions tends to be either difficult or carry severe social ramifications. It's unfortunate, but that's going back to kind of why I was bringing up the time thing. Like, I can't effectively just cycle around the clock. Society doesn't like that. It doesn't like me being awake at night. And this comes through in the way that people talk about it, like weird sleep schedule or unusual. Like, why can't you just be awake during the day like normal people, sort of thing? It's a lot of subtle things that sort of indicate how weird it is. And that's just a little bit of societal cultural pressure to try to get me to conform to what society expects. Because what society expects is what people expect, and what people expect is what they've been taught to expect. This kind of goes actually into another topic that I kind of want to talk about, which is sort of how culture propagates itself. And it happens based upon basically what have people been taught that they then pass on to their children, or more accurately, to other people that they then teach. That's actually more accurate than just their children. But what you run into is people try to teach the society the way that they think society is, or some people teach what they think it ought to be. And this can have powerful impacts, because then the person who's being taught says, oh, that must be the way that society ought to be or is, perhaps is more accurate, and then they act accordingly. And this can create a lot of conflicts if that's not how everybody is seeing things. But that's how society propagates, is people have been taught this is how society is, this is what society believes, this is what the culture is, these are what the norms are, and it can create a lot of cognitive dissonance when those norms are being violated, when people are acting against them. And this can create a lot of culture clashes between larger cultural groups, like, say, the U.S. cultural group and, I don't know, somewhere in the Middle East, or even potentially some parts of Europe or other parts of Asia. Like, different places have different cultural things, like even goes down to like what's valid food and things like that. But anyway, this sort of illusion of culture, I think it's something that, well, for me, it's something that gets very frustrating, because it creates a lot of pain when people take this illusion and make it too concrete. Say, no, that's just the way that things are. Or when it's used as an excuse to act poorly because everybody does it. That's what is expected. That's how things are. And I encourage you to sort of rise above those things if you've ever fallen into using culture as an excuse. It's just an illusion, and it's not a good reason to treat people poorly, to treat people as less than human, as unworthy of being cared about. And that's really where my concerns about this illusion of society stem from. It encourages poor treatment of other people just because they don't align with some sort of cultural idea, when the cultural idea is generally arbitrary to begin with. So anyway, I would love to hear your feedback, your thoughts about this. Please comment below, or however the particular platform you're listening to this on allows you to comment. You can always go to my Facebook page, facebook.com/Sientir Ramblers, and you can comment there. So take care, everyone. Bye-bye.